Our next speaker is Dave Henry, who's the Principal Research Scientist at the CSIRO based in Melbourne and is the Research Leader of the Digital Agriculture Initiative. So please welcome Dave Henry.
Thank you, Mick, and good morning. I'm sure that many of us here will remember, Encyclopaedia Britannica, 244 years in print. In 2010, had 32 volumes, over 18,000 pages, it weighed 58 kilos. Had over 500,000 topics embedded in those 32 volumes. But then along came Wikipedia. Web-based, free, multilingual, instant updates, unlimited size. In August of 2015, it had 18 billion page views in the English version alone. This is a real classic example of disruption to the printed encyclopedia market. My point about bringing up this is that we can think about it as disruption. It disrupted the printed encyclopedia market. We might want to think about it as how it transformed the way we get our knowledge. And so part of my presentation today will be turning this around and thinking about it in a transformational sense rather than strictly just a disruptive, throwing a market into disarray sense. I'm sure we're all familiar with many of the challenges that are facing us moving forward, and I won't harp on this because I think we're all pretty familiar with it. Food security, climate change and climate variability, the complexity of the operating environment, margins, productivity gains, changing demographics of our consumers and customers, and also the issues and the pressures around right to farm, whether it be animal welfare or environmental issues. But you'll notice a bubble there on the bottom left about technology. And I'm sure we're all here to start to understand how we can use some of these transformational technology, particularly in the digital sense, to address many of these trends moving forward. And I think we'll all agree that, as Mick said, the digital revolution, we know it's coming, and it can't not transform agriculture. It cannot help but to transform the way we produce fibre and food and distribute it. But what I want to do today is present some use cases to start thinking about what might be truly disruptive, what might be truly transformational. And we all see it in our lives already, don't we? We've got our phones, we've got our computers. Many of us flew here, transport, medicine, even wearable devices these days. We see it in our daily lives. And there's some emerging trends. Energy, our ability to harvest energy, to store energy and utilise energy. Robotics, of course, material science, and I'm sure what will get a lot of traction in the next couple of days is information technologies. And embedded in information technologies is issues around connectivity, analytics, as Dennis has already covered. One of the examples I want to give early on, and it's not related to agriculture at all, but it's one that I think most of us will be familiar with, is the issue of Uber. Since Uber was introduced formally or launched formally in 2011, it's often been cited as a classic disruptive technology. Particularly so when you hear taxi drivers saying it's totally disrupted the way I do business. It's totally disrupted my business. Now, those who get caught up in the strict theory of disruption would suggest, well, it's actually just a sustaining innovation. It actually makes customers' lives better. But of course, who would argue with a poor taxi driver who's tearing his hair out because it's throwing the industry into disarray? But my point about bringing this up as an example is, again, to think about it as how do we sustain, grow and transform the industry? And yes, there will be disruption along the way. Markets will be disrupted. But which use cases, which technologies, which innovations can actually transform the way that we produce and distribute food and fibre? So I'm going to present some use cases, and the first one I'm sure a lot of us are very familiar with, which is the issue around connectivity. We go out into the country and suddenly we don't have mobile coverage. We hear a lot about NBN and its rollout. And farmers say, my internet's crap and my mobile keeps dropping out. That issue of connectivity. And here are some fairly audacious projects. Google's Project Loon, which is a balloon that will float above developing countries and provide constant internet access. In a similar way that Facebook's Aquila drone intends to do. There's higher-end systems like Nagara up there, which is a CSIRO wireless comms network, and some of the sponsors here as well. There are commercial systems at play, and of course NBN we all hear about. But I want to turn it around and not talk about the technology per se, but talk about what it means for the farmer who's standing in the paddock. So the first example, I'm going to exclude for the moment the internet. I'm just going to talk about connectivity across the farm. What can the farmer have if he's connected within his farm, within his paddocks? Is there any value or return on getting that sort of technology or connectivity at the local scale? So in this particular case, this farmer could be connected to live video streams, to animal location or behaviour, to weather stations, to soil moisture sensors, to leaf sensors, you name it. There's a whole range of third-party technology out there that measure a lot of things. That can all be collated and put at the fingertips for a farmer to understand the current state of all parts of his operation. But we don't see it much. We don't really see a lot of this actually happening today yet in the field. Yet you think about it, and it wouldn't take that much. All the components are there. The sensors are there. The connectivity services are there. Perhaps the analytics don't have to be that complex. Interpretation, and we can deliver and visualise data in a whole wealth of different ways. So why aren't we seeing it? And I'd suggest that perhaps the gaps, I think it goes back to some of what Dennis was talking about, is very much around return on investment. What's the value proposition for doing it? Particularly at the price points of a lot of these communication or connectivity services. And I think, again, reflecting on Dennis's talk about the importance of teams, we often see this as quite a technology push. Technologists coming on farms saying, we've got a technology for you. But until you marry it with the so what for the farmer, the so what for what he's going to do on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. So it needs to integrate the technology with the domain expertise. But what gets really exciting, I guess, is when you take that example and you suddenly connect the farm to the outside world. You suddenly have connectivity through the internet or by other means. So you've got the same farmer who's connected across his property, but now he's actually connected to all sorts of external sources and touch points. Markets, he can put into the context of his operation. He's trying to produce a product to a particular specification. What's my market doing? When do I sell animals? To what specification? What's the likely return? Climate forecasts, putting into context the current status of the system with what it's likely to be like. Benchmarking himself against others in the region to know how he or his paddocks are performing. And that connectivity with experts, whether it be other farmers, advisors, or communities of interest. And of course, managing inputs into the system. So suddenly we're opening up a whole range of different opportunities to take that connectivity issue away from just saying, this is what's going on my property, but actually getting value out of it by connecting it more broadly. It has been done. This is a snapshot of a dashboard for a project that was run in Queensland for a northern beef grazing system. And essentially what that project did from the outset was, I'm going to ignore all the technology at the moment, but I'm going to go out to industry and ask you what information would enable you to make better decisions. more accurate decisions, perhaps more timely decisions, or more risk-informed decisions. And service providers and graziers sat down and workshop what information that they would like. And it's highly variable what individuals would like. But that dashboard just represents the interface, which actually has feeds from markets, from climate, even fire alerts, but also livestock information, soil moisture, climate, and so on across the farm. So it has been done. However, again, we're not quite seeing a lot of penetration in the market or a lot of value capture from it. And the question is why? Those gaps are pretty much the same as the local connectivity one, except for the top one, which is this issue around reliable connectivity at the right price points. So it addresses Dennis's point about return on investment. Could I implement something on my property and get a return on that investment with a demonstrable value proposition? So when you come back, I was just going to add, that sort of connectivity, let's not exclude the additional benefits that we get by linking communities and linking people in remote areas, particularly around social, health, education sort of benefits. So coming back to the question, what does connectivity mean for the guy standing in the paddock? I'd suggest that there are some use cases, some value propositions for local connectivity, but the real benefit comes from when you link it with the broader connectivity through, if you like, the Internet of Things. But let's remember that connectivity is really only an enabler. It's actually what you do with it that creates value. The next area I wanted to touch on that I believe is it's a bit more strategic, it's a bit more out there, but it addresses a need of where farmers will get their information from in the future. And particularly with decline in state-based extension services, it's a real issue for farmers globally, I suggest. So let's take an example. Farmer Jones has a smartphone. He notices a strange-looking rusty thing on his crop. So he takes a photo, adds some words in there, brown rusty thing on emerging leaves that's been a wet couple of weeks. Zaps it up into the cloud. The cloud automatically locates and adds extra data layers according to where he is and what the system knows. It then trawls through extension papers, research papers, social media feeds, voice transcripts, and tries to drill down what the likely cause or likely issue is, and comes back in an ideal world with saying, well, it's this. And it's likely to cause a reduction in yield if you do nothing, and here's a couple of scenarios that you might want to implement. It's like having your local, your expert agronomist there in the field with you, giving you scenarios and giving you some probability-based options to work through in the paddock. And you might think, well, come on, is that very, likely? And I'm just going to throw one from left field at you. Ibm Watson. I'm not sure if you've heard about IBM Watson. It's essentially a supercomputer that's an artificial intelligence system. In 2011, they fed it a whole heap of information and programmed it and put it on Jeopardy. And for those who know Jeopardy and the way they turn questions around, it actually went up against two former champions on Jeopardy and won $1 million challenge. Yes, it had its hiccups, but it actually was able to respond to real-time questions that the compere asked and generated the answers correctly ahead of the champions. And you think, well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, IBM Watson can read 40 million documents in 15 seconds. And the important thing about this is it reads unstructured data. So it's extension papers, it's research papers, it's social media, it's podcasts, And it's that unstructured data that's growing exponentially that will greatly outweigh structured data. In fact, it does, and it will even more so. And importantly, it also uses what we call natural language processing. So you can use your natural language. It's a bit like asking Siri, but hopefully you'd get a normal answer. And that's really important because what it does is it opens up access to more data from more sources. So in the US at the moment, there's some oncology centres that are using this artificial intelligence system to give treatment plans for lung cancer patients. So why can't we think about it as having that personalised Google search, if you like, for the farmer who's standing in the paddock and with that connectivity puts his information up into essentially what is an artificial intelligence type of system that embodies all the knowledge that's probably sitting in RDCs and research organisations and so on, and has a system that's able to provide probabilistic information directly back to the farmer at any point in time, wherever that farmer is. The next one I wanted to touch on, and the final area, is this issue around automation. And we see automation a lot already in agriculture, whether it's guidance systems and robotics, even auto-drafting, irrigation systems. One of the use cases I wanted to throw at you is one that might be familiar with you conceptually, because the idea's been floated around for quite some time. But it's the idea of autonomously controlling livestock in the environment. I was going to pick an intensive dairy grazing system, and I thought, oh, no, maybe I'll pick a northern beef extensive grazing system. And I thought I'd be a bit more challenging, a bit more sort of strategic or futuristic and think about sheep in mixed farming systems. So if you take a farmer in northwestern Victoria who's predominantly been a cropping enterprise, he's ripped out all his internal fences. Makes it really hard to manage sheep in those systems, without high labour input to move fences. The impact of grazing is variable across the paddock. Some areas are underutilised, some areas are overutilised. There's erosion and weed issues, and sheep performance itself is suboptimal. It's just really difficult to manage sheep in those systems. But in this instance, the farmer fits, let's call it, an autonomous control unit to sheep. So now, on his iPad or his tablet or his computer, he allocates zones of the paddock to where he wants particular stocking rates. And he simply allocates 100 sheep to that corner of the paddock, 200 over that half, and another 400 down somewhere else. And the system automatically identifies, separates the animals, and allocates them to their respective areas. Some of us will know this essentially as virtual fencing, but I really want to get away from the name virtual fencing because this is really about precision management of livestock in the environment. In this example, it is the precision matching or the more precise matching of those the sheep requirements nutritionally to feed availability. So in this system, the sheep, or the system, could be monitored continuously for behaviour of the animals, could be programmed to move sheep at particular times, and might even give alerts back when something goes, when they're all going 100 kilometres an hour down a highway with stock theft. So we've talked about this for a long time, virtual fencing. The idea's been around for many, many years. Are we close, or is it really just a pipe dream? Well, I want to throw 4 key factors at you for this to keep an eye on. We know we can technically control, particularly cattle, using a combination of wireless technologies, sensors and GPS coordinates. We know we can do that. And if I click, hopefully that video will start. There we go. It's been shown that we can control cattle constrain them into particular parts of the landscape, or move them from one part to the other. It has been published, the sort of welfare implications of this as well. Since that early technology work was, or technical work was done, we've seen the huge advances in the technology itself. Miniaturisation, the ability to harvest energy, use energy, GPS accuracy, and so on. So there's been a convergence of the technology and the application, or the behaviour work. What's really interesting is those last couple of points. One is there's always been a very, very strong industry pull for this as a strategic game changer. Now, I use that word because I've heard that repeatedly from industry. But there is now a commercialisation pathway, and there's a startup company called Adjacens, based out of Melbourne, that are currently building and testing prototype virtual fencing devices. And there's a new project that's been funded for weed management from the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources to assist in proving this up for sheep. So it's closer. One of the lessons I just want to touch on before I wind up about automation, and it comes out of the University of Sydney's work on robotic dairies, is don't let the technology control the system. Let it complement the system. Make the system work. Don't let the robot, in this case, drive the system. So when I go back to one of my original slides about, we know it's coming, and it will come, what's truly going to be transformational or disruptive? I think, first of all, we need to get our mind around, we're not talking necessarily about disruption from a negative point of view. We need to think transformational, as semantic perhaps. It's very much about how we connect, and I know there's all sorts of issues in there that Dennis has already touched on many of those. It's about how we collect data, it's how we utilise data and capture value from it. And whether that's through automation or not, it's about getting the system to work. It's not about getting the technology to work, it's about getting the technology to complement the system. Thank you.